Welcome to another video on Scuba Continuous Intelligence. In this video, I'm going to be giving training on flows and how to build them. I'm also going to put out additional videos that describe how flows work on the back end, and then also about building sessions. So starting in the UI, you'll notice that I'm in the Apps section. So to access flows inside of Scuba, you can go to the Apps menu and then select the flow builder here. So inside of this builder, you'll see that there's a lot of different buttons and inputs. And so just starting up at the top, every flow is built in context to an actor. So it's looking at actors that generally did sequences of events in a session. And so in this case, I'm using the user actor. Your cluster might have additional values in there, so make sure to select the actor that you're interested in looking at. And then you'll see here there's default 3 steps included in this flow out of the box. So as far as step management goes, you'll notice in the top right corner there's this minus button, and then down here there's this step button. So if you want to add a step to a flow, you can easily click that step button plus step button, and you'll notice that it just adds steps once you click it. There's no limit to the number of steps that you can add, but just note that if you add hundreds of steps, the flow can get a little confusing. So now if I wanted to remove these steps, I can just press that minus button and it'll take the steps away. Each step can also be named uniquely. So this could be named homepage step, and this could be a purchase step. So in this example, you'll notice that there's different rules and criteria that we can set for each respective step. So step 1 is generally going to be beginning with starting a flow. You'll notice if you click this drop down, there are other options here as well, but we don't necessarily have to worry about those for these examples. They're for more advanced use cases. But you'll see that there's end flow from inactivity. This is around session rules. There's end flow before, in the example that you might want to end a flow before a certain action occurs, or end a flow after a certain action occurs, like if they purchase, end that flow. So you'll notice in the second panel here, you'll see all events. So in this case, you can then define what does the user have to do in that step. And so in this case, we chose homepage step, so I could just click the drop down and select my action column. And in this case, I want events that match homepage view. And in the second step here, you'll see that there is a transition module. So in this case, I can click on that and choose, just like I did from step 1, where this step is either transitioning from, or if it's starting a new flow that is running in parallel to your existing flow, or again, ending from inactivity, or ending flow before or after certain events. But in most cases, you're going to want your steps to transition from the steps before them. So we'll leave this at transition from step, and in this case it's called homepage step, which was what we named up here. If you don't name your steps, it will generally just be the step before it. So in this case it would have read transition from step 1 on, and in this case, all events. So here, let's just not choose a specific event type. We can leave it at all events, meaning that users will come in and land on the home page, then go do something. We don't necessarily know what that is. Maybe we want the system to show us what that is. And then down here in the third step, just like we did with the first, we named it. And again, we're transitioning now from step 2. And in this all events, I can select purchase. So just like I did with step 1, again, I can find whatever columns are relevant for me. In this case, it's going to be action, and I want that to be the purchase action. So in each one of these steps, you'll also notice this rule button at the bottom of each step. And so if I click on that, you again have rules just like you did when you chose the transition or the start flow. So you can add multiple conditions for each step, whether you want different rules about inactivity or ending flow after certain actions. You even can use this transition from step to have one starting point, which could be homepage view, and then step 2 could transition from step 1, which is homepage view, and then step 3 could also transition from, let's say, homepage step. So that's just a cool rule to keep in mind for more advanced flows and advanced use cases. You'll also notice, just like in the Explore view or some of the other builders inside of Scuba, you have the option to add multiple conditions, whether those are AND statements or statements. So if I wanted to have users that landed on homepage and have the device type of, let's say, Android, I can add that in any one of the steps that I'm defining inside of my flow. So moving down, you'll notice this global rules section. So global rules are rules that apply to every single flow that define the session criteria, meaning that if I want users to do these things, they land on homepage, go and do something, and then eventually go and purchase, I can say that they have to do that within a max total time of 1 week. Or I can change this global rule to end flow from inactivity. So if I want people to land on homepage, do some stuff, and then eventually purchase, but I want them to do that in a session where they're active the whole time, and we define the session to end after a period of 30 minutes of inactivity, I can choose end flow from inactivity of, and then from here choose 30 minutes. And just like in a lot of the other features inside of Scuba, you can add in anything you want. Maybe I want it to be 12 minutes, for example. It's completely up to you. So in this case, we said 30 minutes. And you'll notice here in the bottom, there's a filtered to. So this is a global filter, meaning that if I wanted all of the users that meet the criteria of this flow to be from the region of the US and Canada, let's say, I can select that here, and it will apply this filtered to rule to every single step, just so I don't have to repetitiously create those rules in each step. But I'm going to leave that out for now. So moving over to the right here, this is the query panel. So this is where your query results will return. And so before you can ever run a flow, you have to name it. So this is going to be homepage to doing something to purchase. Not a great name, but it makes sense. And then you'll notice here in the output, there's a show value. So in this operator, we can choose whether we want it to count the number of instances of this flow or the number of actors that did those instances. So for example, in our flow here, we have end flow from inactivity of 30 minutes. Well, in a certain time range, let's say this 7 days ago to now time range, I can land on your website and do this flow, land on homepage, do something, and then purchase multiple times. I can do that multiple times in a day. I can do that multiple times in a week. So when we count instances, it's going to count for me as an actor, how many times did I meet the criteria of this flow? Whereas if I switch it to actors, it's going to count how many actors had instances. So if I was one actor that had 10 instances, I would only be counted once in this example. Whereas if I switched it to instances, it would return a value of 10. So down here in the split by, we're going to want to run this against action. And the reason for that is because in this second step, it's showing us every possible action that our users did after they landed on homepage and then before they purchased. So if I run this without that, you'll see that I'll just get one bar, right? Because I'm not grouping it by anything. So it's saying this is the number of instances based on the criteria of your first step, second step, and then eventually your third step. But if I switch this and incorporate action and press go, you'll now see a very different result. So in this case, you're seeing people land on homepage, they go ahead and search or go do other things like go back to the homepage, and then they'll eventually go to purchase. And one thing to note here as well is that in these gray bars, you'll see your drop off. So in this case, we had in a 7-day time period, a ton of users that landed on homepage and then didn't do anything else in their instances. They landed on homepage and then they bounced. They didn't have, a second step, and you can't have a third step if you didn't have a second. So I'm going to clear this out and create a different experience here. So let me remove some of these steps and delete this criteria and call this any event. And let me add a step here called any event and say start flow from all events, and let's create a 5-step flow. And so in this case, sorry, and the naming is a little off, so we can call this step 2, step 3, step 4, and then purchase. So let's say I wanted to see what are all the things that happened before a user purchased in 4 steps before they purchase. Well, with Scuba, you can leave every step at all events, and if you're splitting by action, it will show you every single possible event that our users did before they went on to go ahead and purchase. So I'll here filter this to action that matches purchase and then run the flow again. And now we see a very different flow. So because I didn't define specific events to happen in these sequences, I can now see users land on homepage, some of them go on to search, some of them then go to a search results page, product description pages, and then they go ahead to purchase. And these vary very dramatically. And so if I switch it to a table view, you can see very easily what is the most common path that users are doing. It looks like in this case they're just looking at search results and then they're dropping off without purchasing. And so going back to the flow here, one thing to note is that this is also just a query preview. This is not a way to do actual analyses against flows. And if you watch the video on sessions, you'll see how we actively incorporate different rules set into a session in an Explore query. But the way to get the most value out of your flows is to use the builder to define it here, define the steps, preview it in the preview feature, and then save it in the top right corner. And when you save it, it's going to adopt the name that you gave it up in this top bar. So if I press save, you'll notice that I have the option to press explore. And so if I do that, it'll bring me into the Explore view. And now we're looking at the Explore view where we can build queries asking any kind of question that we want around this flow. So in this case, we're counting the number of instances of this flow. And so we'll see how many times each step or state was met. And so we'll see that there's a certain number of instances in the 4 steps before purchasing. And in this case, 34,000 users purchased in individual sessions. Whereas if I were to switch this to actors and then run the query again, you'll notice that those numbers will change. So there were 29,000 users that had multiple instances. I think it was 34,000 instances where they went ahead to purchase. Other cool things with flows move outside of this Sankey visualization. The Sankey is a very good way to do exploration. And one of those things is because it's interactive. So if I wanted to filter to users that dropped off, I can go ahead and say filter to this state, for example. And you'll see that now it sets different rules where it says filter to the flow that we just defined and look at or return users that had a last step of step 2. And so that's something else that's pretty interesting to explore. So just going back here, I can also use different operators. So in this case, maybe I want to see what the average total time it takes for users to land on the home page, do a bunch of different actions, and then go ahead and purchase. I can choose the average operator, and then in this case I'm choosing total time. There's also different things in here, total events, time between steps. So how long does it take after a user lands on home page to do their second, third, fourth action, and then eventually how long does it take for them to purchase. But in this case, I'm going to see what's the average of total time in this flow, and run it. And we'll see now a time-based result return. So in this case, 2 hours, 2 hours, etc. And I can switch this to a number view and see that it is an average of 39 minutes for users to move through this flow. Again, I can switch this to something like an average of total events. So we'll see that there's a 9.76 average. With chart options, we also can switch this format to a number, and it'll round to do 2 decimal places. So there's a lot of cool tools to take a look at inside of this flow. And just like we did inside of the preview window, one thing to note as well is that with this flow, if I wanted to see, again, what are all these actions that users are doing before they get on to purchase, I would have to add in the split by or group by feature. And in this case, we want to look at action and then run it. And now we'll see all of the different steps that users did before they went ahead to purchase.